to Michelle. She's going to assist me as we move through the slides. And I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us. And I hope you find the information helpful. Okay. So we're going to start off here with, because the round 3 for Affordable Housing Development Fund is intended to specifically require units of general local government, or UGLUGs, we call them favorably with their acronyms, to be the only eligible applicants for the funding. We're going to start off with that hierarchy level and discuss first what the subrecipient responsibilities are, and then we'll kind of go into the different types of examples of the types of opportunities for you to be able to place the funding into your proposed project. So reviewing very quickly about your subrecipient responsibilities, they are required to complete an environmental assessment or assist with the completion of an environmental assessment. In almost every instance, an environmental assessment level of environmental review record will need to be completed for each of your projects, unless you're under 5 units, and there are some other specific categories where you may not have to reach to the level of environmental assessment, but we will assist you further with technical assistance if necessary, if you need for us to assist you in identifying what level of environmental review is necessary for your proposed project. And then, of course, if acquisition of the land is required, then that's the next step. Well, actually, acquisition of the land or identification of the land is going to have to be almost working in tandem. You can't actually physically acquire the land. That would be considered a choice limiting action if you don't already own the property. So you're going to complete the environmental review, then you're going to acquire the land once you've identified that the environmental review is accepted and approved. Then you're going to procure a developer if you have not already procured a developer. If that is the way that you want to structure your deal. Subrecipients may choose to work the entire award of the grant funds internally and avoid the procurement of a developer and go straight to acquiring a general contractor if they want to become the developer themselves. Then you'll need to agree on a cost per unit, particularly in the homeownership segment of availability of these funds. And then again, for the home buyer segment, home buyer marketing, identifying eligible home buyers and confirming their eligibility based on HUD's requirements. The intent today was to assist you in determining how to best identify the funding that you need in order to convert your project from concept to a fully formed proposal. What we see here is, and to allow for, as I mentioned earlier, to allow for creativity and diversity due to the coverage area, which is statewide essentially, NCORE has deliberately chosen not to select only one method of funding a proposed homeownership project or putting you into one particular box of how the funding can be used. We're offering you the opportunity to identify within your local community where the gap is and where these funds can be used to fill that gap for you. Due to the numerous questions concerning how to structure a homeownership development project, we prepared this workshop for you. And we see that there are 3 major types of gaps where CDBG funding may be used to assist. The first is the appraisal gap, where there's an instance where the cost of building a housing unit exceeds what would be the appraised value after the unit is constructed and ready for sale. We're going to go over each one of these separately in separate slides in a moment. The affordability gap is targeted towards the home buyers, specifically assistance like down payment and closing cost assistance, reducing their first mortgage or the amount that they need in order to borrow in order to purchase the home, and the financing gap, which is essentially a developer gap, and it's a subsidy to assist in the development of the units or the construction financing. So giving you examples now, we took some liberty on some of these because we needed to be able to visually illustrate our how this would work out. What I encourage each of you to do is consider your unique scenario and plug in or remove certain costs that may where it's needed. So in this appraisal gap funding example, we're suggesting, okay, maybe I want to build 5 single family homes on raw land. So I have a land acquisition cost, I have a development cost of the land, as well as the installation of the infrastructure because it currently doesn't exist. And so we plugged in numbers here just for illustrative purposes. And then the cost to build the house, the vertical cost to build the house. So your total cost per unit in this instance, using these numbers, would be $310,000 per unit. But your average final appraisal value per unit is, say, $275,000. So that obviously creates a gap, immediate gap of $35,000 per unit, because the appraisal is going to come in lower than what your total cost per unit is. We are making some presumptions that the land has not been donated. Of course, again, plugging in these numbers or eliminating these numbers as needed in these examples to help you along in identifying how to finance and how to show financially how the funding would be used. This also presumes that there is a developer fee that's already included in the illustrated estimate of the land and infrastructure development. So that $600,000 figure, we're presuming that that also includes the developer fee. And so then what you do is you take your total cost per unit and you subtract the appraisal, the maximum appraisal value that you can estimate that probably would come from the fully constructed housing unit, gives us that $35,000 gap. So in this instance, for this particular type of gap funding, you're looking at $35,000 per unit times 5 units, or a total request of $175,000. Please note that our program manual references the HUD Home and Housing Trust Fund annually published maximum sales prices by county for the housing units, and please refer to the NCORE website for this chart. It is already up on our website regarding the maximum per unit sales prices that you can achieve. The next example that we gave you is the affordability funding gap. And in this example, what we're saying is that we want to build 5 single family homes, maybe on scattered infill lots throughout your community. The utilities, of course, are already in place because these are infill. So these are just vacant lots that are in between existing housing. So, and we also make the presumption here that there is no land acquisition cost. Again, plug the number in if it's not applicable to your scenario. Also, keeping with our initial estimation of construction cost per unit at $150,000 per unit, that would mean $750,000 for all 5 homes. In this instance, what we're looking at, again, the affordability funding gap focuses on the home buyers who are going to purchase the home. And so we're not talking about any development subsidy of any kind or anything like that. And so if we indicate that the sales price, and again, using your maximum sales prices as indicated in the charts that's been provided in the NCORE website, say that the sales price of the home that you've constructed on this infill lot is $240,000, but your home buyer is only able to secure a mortgage for $160,000. So the gap for that particular home buyer is $80,000. So what you could then presume then in the affordability funding gap example is for this particular buyer, there's an $80,000 gap. We will provide the $80,000 in down payment and closing costs to close the gap for that particular buyer. So then if you took that times 5, it should, I think that math ends up at $420,000. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this as far as the affordability funding gap. If you're looking just at the buyers, you can install a predetermined maximum subsidy for each buyer of each home. Say we're not going to give any more than $100,000 per home buyer. There may be some instances though where your maximum cap may not be enough to fill the entire gap for a particular buyer who desires to purchase the home. In that instance, that buyer would have to find another source of funding in order to fill the remaining gap so that they could reach the sales price that we have listed. There are other programs statewide for down payment and closing cost assistance, and we encourage you to look into those in your local community and your regionally as well as statewide, because they may be additional sources that you would want to tap into. Or you can remain flexible in the amount of gap financing that's needed on an individual basis. So you may have some buyers who only need $40,000 in gap assistance in down payment and closing costs in order to be able to purchase the home. But then there are other buyers who maybe are at a lower income or have higher other debt that restrict them in the amount of their first mortgage that they can be approved for, where some buyers may receive more gap assistance than others. So, and the choice is yours. We can work either way. HUD does not prescribe that you do it one particular way or another. Please realize that if you use that suggested alternative of a maximum across the board maximum cap for assistance, say it's $80,000 per buyer, you may end up with buyers who don't need the full amount of $80,000 in order to purchase. In that instance, you may end up with a surplus that would be remaining at the end of your project. All 5 of the homes have been sold. Everybody got the assistance they needed in order to purchase, because we're not going to over subsidize. Just because we say the maximum assistance is $80,000 doesn't mean that every applicant receives $80,000, because they may need far less than that. And so we will be looking for you to then, there may be some surplus that's left over remaining that then as the developer, so I'm talking to both audiences here because I don't know the number of folks who are on the subrecipient end of this, local government applicants, or the developers who may be joining in today. So it may result in a surplus at the end of the program that then would go back to the subrecipient and then may also be refunded to NCOR. And we can deal with that, and we can talk you through that scenario should that be a possibility if you're looking at this scenario. Okay. So the third funding gap that we want to talk about was the financing funding gap, and this is relatively simple. Say you want to build 20 single family infill units, and this is the financing funding gap is also called the developer gap or the developer funding gap. And the reason for that is because clearly if either the developer has or the subrecipient is encouraging that the developer have true motivation to maximize the affordability of the units produced to the greatest extent possible, you may want to avoid, as a developer, borrowing during construction, because there are costs involved in borrowing funds even during the construction, which then are passed along as part of the total price that then the buyer is responsible for. And so if there is a motivation for the subrecipient or the developer to truly maximize the affordability of these units, make it as skinny as possible and as affordable as possible, then you may want to try to avoid using traditional lending sources. In this case, it would be a construction loan. We gave this scenario where this developer wants to build 20 single-family infill housing units. Utilities are already existing, so that was a presumption that we made. We also presume that the borrower, and it's indicated here on one of the bulleted points, that the developer can borrow some, but not all of the construction financing that's needed to complete the project. So in this instance, the gap is the amount between the total construction cost of the 20 homes is 3.45 million, including the 15% developer fee, which is allowable. The developer is able to secure 2 million of it from other sources. So then the request for the award of funds of DR funding would be 1.45 million. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So here we have a scenario where one thing we want to encourage here is that you can use 1, 2, or all 3 of these gap scenarios when establishing what it is that you're asking for in the amount of funding that you're requesting. And so in this instance, we kind of blended a few of those examples together, those gaps, to show you how a blended gap request would look. So Anytown, North Carolina has a homeownership development. They have a developed parcel within their land bank or that they already own, and they'd like to build 10 homes on it for the buyers, earning up to 80% of the area median income. Anytown would then apply for the $65,000 per unit in a financing or developer gap to assist with the developer with minimizing or lowering their carrying costs during construction or development of the project. And then they're also going to be asking us for $70,000 per unit in affordability funding, which is again directly to the borrower. So the total request would be 1.35 million, which is $135,000 per unit in the combined financing and affordability gap, or the developer and affordability gap funding, times 20 units, right? Or 10 units, sorry. So then it's split out with $65,000 in building costs, the developer financing, and $70,000 in affordability assistance to the home buyers. So things we want you to remember. I hope that you were all able to join us for our initial presentation. When we introduced the program and made our big official announcement of round 3, we're anticipating that, and certainly according to our program manual, we indicate that the maximum award that you can request for any project is $10 million. We anticipate that your requests may be something less than that, but you're not limited up to the $10 million. Developer fees for any developer involved and in partnership with the unit of local government, the UGLUG, are capped at 15%. The general contractor fees for the general contractors who are going to do your vertical construction are capped at 20%. And so the general contractors, unless the subrecipient is going to undertake the project internally and is securing the general contractor themselves and will be acting as the developer for this project, are not subject to the same procurement regulations as developers are in their relationship with the subrecipient. So please keep that in mind, and please refer back to the program manual concerning procurement regulations. We would prefer you to have a pre-sale approach in your homeownership development projects. That means that you have some mechanism identified where you will be able to select or pre-select applicants who may be income eligible so that you have a waiting queue of buyers who may be eligible to purchase the homes once you've completed the construction. Also remember that your construction must meet green and resilient building standards. Again, I'm going to ask you to refer back to the program manual for very specific information concerning the green and resilient building standards that HUD requires. According to the program manual, the completed homes must be sold within 9 months. I'm not sure that we'll have any problems with that, but I did want to highlight that as a item to remember. And that the net proceeds from the sales of these homes do not necessarily count as officially as program income. It doesn't mean that the net proceeds do not need to be reported in HUD reporting that we're going to be required to enter for HUD's purposes, but that net proceeds do not count as program income, which has its own definition within HUD. Okay, so it was only 9 slides. I was thinking to myself that maybe I was talking a little bit fast. I thought I was doing appropriate pauses. I hope I haven't gone too fast. We're going to keep the screen. We're going to keep the slideshow up on the screen in case there's an opportunity for me to be referring back to one of the particular gap slides that may be helpful in understanding your particular scenario. So again, to reiterate what Tracy had mentioned earlier when we started, a special note that we invite you to contact us requesting customized technical assistance if you feel like you need additional guidance regarding HUD regulatory compliance or the NCORE program restrictions contained within the program manual. And at this time, I'm just going to open it up for any questions from anyone in our audience. Thank you.
So we have a question in the chat. Can the developer and the GC be the same entity?
For purposes of procurement, the subrecipient would have to be careful if identifying the developer and the GC as the same. But other than that, I don't believe that there's any restriction. The developer could be the GC as well.
We have a question in the chat. Completed homes should be sold within 9 months. Is that sold within 9 months of completion or within 9 months of the end of the grant program?
That's a very good question. HUD has very little tolerance for construction of housing units that aren't occupied in a relatively rapid fashion. So the restriction is 9 months within completion, after completion of the unit.
Matthew, does that answer your questions? Yes, please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Jody, and I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I'm the president of a foundation. And we have already purchased property that we had rezoned, and our plan is to build 48 townhome units that we will sell to our workforce. So my first question is, does your funding allow for more than 80% of area median income? Our target is 80 to 120.
Right, and that's a typical scenario for workforce housing, is slightly on the higher side. Okay. Unfortunately, with the CDBG disaster recovery or DR funding, we are limited to the 80% of area median income or less.
Okay, so this would not be a program for us.
Doesn't sound like it.
Okay, very good.
Right at 80.
Okay, yeah. That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I couldn't have done that good of a job, folks.
Well, and we know that it's possible that questions will not come to you until you've had a chance to digest and think about how you would apply some of the concepts that Nancy's discussed to your particular situation. So that's why we want to make sure you know that we're available for future questions. The question in the chat, do the funds have to be repaid or are they grant funds?
There is no requirement that the funds be repaid. The subrecipient, as the applicant, may choose to, when they partner to develop either rental or the homeownership housing, they may place the additional restriction that the funds are repaid. Because it is an allowable opportunity to select that option. Our program manual doesn't stipulate that, and HUD does not stipulate that.
And if the funds are repaid to the local government unit, then the local government unit is able to retain those funds for future affordable housing programming.
Thank you. I'd like to add one additional thing. You know, grant funds may give the perception that there is no restriction. One of the criteria that HUD requires for the use of CDBG, the expenditure of CDBG-DR funding, is an affordability period based upon the amount of investment that's provided to the housing units. And so there is an affordability period generally that is most effectively enforced using some type of a loan agreement. But then the loan agreement could be as simple as 0% interest, deferred payment, periodically forgiven over the affordability period.
And thank you, Nancy. That's a good reminder for me to ask everyone to be sure and check the program manual for Affordable Housing Development Fund Round 3 to see all of the requirements that come along with these dollars.
Well, we're excited to see your projects as you submit them. We're very excited about the openness that we created in this round 3 of the Affordable Housing Development Fund, because we really felt like we wanted to give every opportunity for the best and brightest projects across the state in our eligible counties to be able to, to pitch their greatest ideas and maybe bring them to fruition if they were sitting on a shelf somewhere. We're very excited to see the submissions that come in, and we look forward to talking with you further about your specific projects.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then we will let everybody get back to their day jobs. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.